Hey, we are live. Welcome to tonight's program. My name is Dave. I will be your host for tonight's event, which is Versatility and Durability, the journey of a photojournalist and their camera. So we're coming to you from the camera store, and I want to thank everyone who makes this possible. Tonight behind the scenes, we do have our dream team. We have Gary and Graham with us. They're making sure everything can't go wrong, or hopefully nothing goes wrong. That's thumbs up over there. So far, so good. We're only about 30 seconds in. So it is a live show. Keep that in mind. So things can happen. If something does happen, we'll try and keep everybody posted, of course. But so far, we're doing extremely well. So we're happy about that. We also have Canon Canada, who is sponsoring this event tonight. And in partnership with the Camera Store, we have a very special promotion going on. And if you've registered for this event, you'll get an email with it after the event. But if you haven't registered yet, don't worry about it. Simply email Evelyn, which is EVELYN, at thecamerastore.com, and she will look after you and get that forwarded to you. So part of the fun for me for doing these live events is that it is actually live. It's not pre-recorded or anything, so we are fielding questions. We're monitoring the chat, looking for questions for our guest, which I'll introduce shortly here. If you don't want to pose a question in the chat, feel free just to reach out to me. My email is even simpler than Evelyn's. It's dave@thecamerastore.com. And I'll be monitoring that as well. So tonight, we have a very good show tonight. We are welcoming Toronto star photojournalist Steve Russell, who developed his love of photojournalism while living in South America and reading Time magazine and, of course, National Geographic. Steve has been at the Toronto Star for almost 25 years and has covered the turning of the millennium in Tonga, 6 Olympic Games, championship runs by the Toronto Raptors and Toronto FC, and way too many Toronto Maple Leafs first-round exits. Steve, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's fun to be here in a virtual real camera store.
So first, right off the bat, I got to ask, what's with the photo behind you?
Yeah, so this is not pixelated. This is a project that our photo editor, Tara Slonich, who is from Calgary originally, he took pictures that we had leading up to Canada Day during the first weeks of the pandemic and put 3,000 of them together in a mosaic of all our assignments throughout the first couple months of the pandemic.
Well, that is like a pandemic project, that's for sure. That's fantastic. So you have been around for a long time, and you've got some fantastic photos. I've already seen a few of them already. What are we kind of in store for tonight? What can the viewers expect?
Well, what I like to do when I talk to people about photography is like, the kind of photography I do, newspaper photography, it's really like photojournalism is really a passion project right now because there's not too many people that get jobs in photojournalism anymore. Like at the Star, when I started at the Star, we had 22 photographers.
Wow.
Down to 5 now and 2 interns, right? So I feel bad for people trying to break into the business, and I find the people that really do break into the business have a passion for telling stories. Even some of the people that I know that have corporate clients still like to keep their toe dipping into that photojournalism thing because it is a lot of fun and it's like a rush, and it's fun being on the leading edge of the news. And it like for me as a newspaper photographer, it's really challenging because you end up being like almost good at everything, but the master of nothing, right? Like, but the other thing I like about it too is that I find that like different aspects of photojournalism that I practice at the newspaper, it's kind of like a big circle that keeps going around. Like, like what I learn in the studio about lighting and composition, I can apply to sports photography. What I learned in sports photography about, like reacting quickly and, finding that moment helps me in when I shoot news photography, when I'm doing protests or just like, a local event. And, what I learned from lighting goes into all those things. And what I learned from lighting from those other events, I can bring into feature photography and then sometimes even into the studio. Like, it's like for me, it's always intersecting. So,
well, just like the title of tonight's presentation, right? The versatility, your skill set, how you can address pretty much everything. The jack of all trades photographer, because you don't know exactly what you're going to be shooting when you get out there and what different angles are going to be out there. And then we'll also talk a little bit about your camera gear, and maybe that comes through the durability part of it. So we'll get into that. But
Well, the thing is we have to be durable too, because we're carrying around, like I carry around my kit with me almost all the time. And I carry around a pared down kit. Like I'm not, if I'm doing studio shoot, I'm doing it with like, like Canon strobes on sticks that I might carry with me, like, like a couple light stands. But for the most part, I'm not going around with a big lighting kit. I'm doing everything like kind of like guerrilla photography. I'm showing up and I'm doing something really simple, but trying to make it look complex. Like when I'm doing like flash stuff outside of work, like when I'm outside shooting a portrait of like a CEO. I'd love to go in with like a big complex lighting kit, but that just doesn't work for me because I've got to go in and get out really quick because
perfect.
I have like I'm on like a 9 hour shift and I might shoot 3 or 4 assignments within that 9 hours. So
Jeez. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I know you got a ton of photos for us, which I'm excited. I've already seen a few of them, and they're fantastic. So let's get right into your presentation, and I'll interrupt you when there's a good question gets posed, and we'll work our way through the evening. And we only have like a little over an hour, so let's see if we can get it through most of them.
okay, so I'm going to share my screen here, so bear with me. Okay, can everybody see that? Excellent. So I'm sharing this picture first because it's one of my favorite pictures, and I've kind of kept my scope of pictures for this limited to like the start of the pandemic and onwards, because it's been a busy 3 years, and it's been a really rewarding 3 years for me too, because as a photojournalist for the Toronto Star, I always feel like I'm the eyes of the city. I feel like, like I'm the person that's bringing visual elements to stories that our writers write. And it's a lot of fun to do that and think of it that way. And I really felt that so much more during the pandemic because, like we had the lockdown and nobody was in the streets. And then, you know, as we started coming out of lockdowns, everybody was still like, like there weren't too many people around. So I was one of the only people driving around the city and looking at things. And for me, I was talking earlier about photojournalism being a passion project for me. And so like, I'm always thinking about pictures. I'm always thinking about the story. And this is a picture, like it's one of my favorite from the pandemic. My wife and I during the pandemic were walking a lot, and we still do. We go for an hour walk almost every night, and I usually carry a camera with me. And this one night it was raining, and it was at that point in the pandemic where they in Toronto they had opened outdoor patios, but not inside restaurants. So it was a rainy night, and I was going to take a camera with me, and I said no, I'm not because it's raining. Nobody's going to be out. And we walked to the end of my street and couple streets over, I saw this scene at a restaurant, and I was like, oh my God, that's a great picture. My wife, who knows about all my passion and all this, she's there like, go get your camera. Like she knew what I was thinking because I was going to dwell on this for the whole hour walk. So she's there like, go get your camera. So I ran home, got the camera, took this picture. And for me, it's like my iconic moment of the pandemic. It's like a couple that it was raining, but they were deterred to have dinner outside and, enjoy a night out. And then so like for the first thing in the pandemic, like it was kind of like the first thing, we go to press conferences at City Hall, and all of a sudden there was no media there. So it was really strange. And like that's what I was trying to show too, is like I go and I'm trying to show what's different and record these like images that are kind of be like, they're part of history now. So this was Mayor Tory, who had come back from a trade mission to England, and they were exposed to somebody with COVID in England. And so they came back and they were having the first virtual press conferences that I've seen in a long time. And then we're, just going around and recording, like, taking the pulse of the city. Everything locks down. This was a hotel downtown. like one room, like one person staying at this big, huge hotel. So, like I'm just trying to illustrate stories that show where we are. CN Tower with like some condos, more people staying in at night. So like all of a sudden, all these condos along the waterfront were just always like lights on. So it's kind of like fun to see that too. And it's funny because where that hotel was, you had like all these dark windows and one light on, and then you go to the condos that are right beside it, and they're all lit up too. This is just showing the emptiness of downtown, like during the lockdown. Like as someone who drives around the city, like I always joke that I'm paid to drive and I do pictures for free. The lockdown was like just marvelous for me because I could get from one end of the city in record time. It's like, oh, I don't know what traffic's like in Calgary right now, but it was so nice to just move around the city so easily. Again, just showing like, playing with light. Like I'm always, when I'm walking around, I'm always trying to make notes of different times of day to go places and take pictures based on what the light is. This is at the Toronto Dominion Center in the financial district. And, I have the CN Tower to place the picture. I have the dark towers of like the Toronto Dominion Center. And the building's black, but it kind of leads into that thing of like emptiness. And then I have the one person walking through the nice reflected light off a building behind me. It was funny because like all the tennis courts were closed, and you go downtown and people would be, all these were empty parking lots, and people couldn't go to the park to play tennis, but they go to the parking lot to play tennis. So like for the first part of the pandemic, these were the things we were looking for, like trying to show a little bit of the isolation, trying to show a little bit of, the joie de vivre of people around Toronto. This is like the hotels in Toronto started. I guess they probably did this in Calgary too. They started making hearts out of the empty rooms. That's the Hilton. It was kind of a glorious time because I could do pictures that I would be able to do at certain times of day. Like this is rush hour in Toronto. And during the pandemic, there was hardly any cars on the street. So like I could isolate things like a cyclist going down the street without having 3 rows of cars in front of them. As the pandemic went on, they started doing memorials for people that had passed away from COVID. Here, the city of Toronto had placed 2,000 candles to commemorate the 2,000 people in Toronto that had died of COVID. And it's just on their ice rink. They left it there for like a week. We have Toronto Island. So during the pandemic, the ferry wasn't going to Toronto Island just for like the people that lived on it. So I would, go around and just trying to shoot like an empty Toronto Island in the summertime, which is kind of counterintuitive. And you find people that have made their way to Toronto Island, whether they took like a canoe there or supped over there, just enjoying the facilities. There's someone on a swing, like just across from the playground. One of the last things I covered before the pandemic was a dance performance. And so once the pandemic started, I reached out to a bunch of entertainers and people that worked in the entertainment industry to do a photo series of what they were doing, where they were practicing, rehearsing, and just trying to stay in shape. This is one of the members of the National Ballet, Nicholas Rose, and he was training in a park beside his house because he lived in a basement apartment. And he had like a 6.5-foot ceiling, so he couldn't do his leaps. So he would go to the park beside his house and practice his leaps. This is Tina Pereira, another one of the ballet dancers, and she was doing, that part of the pandemic really gave some of these people like a lot of reach. Like Nicholas and Tina were doing Zoom classes, and they had students from around the world. They were they were teaching classes to South Koreans and stuff like that. So it kind of like really opened up, like, you know, as much as we were locked down and closed in, it kind of opened up the world to us a little bit too. Like, you know, people found new opportunities, stuff like that. This is an aerialist. Her studio, she usually performs on silks, but her studio was closed because of the pandemic. So she was keeping in shape by doing her routines on a swing in her backyard. This was a woman who would dance in the street, and she was like doing it to raise money for, oh, what was she raising money for? I forget now. She's a Miss Canada too. Like, this is one of my favorite ones. This is a contemporary dancer, and when I was setting up the shoot, she was doing lots of Zoom classes, and I was there like, "Well, where do you dance?" And she's like, "Usually my living room." So I was there like, "Well, when do you dance?" And she's there like, "Oh, around like 5 p.m. I'll start because I'm doing a class online or something like that." So I went out to her house, and it was just like that perfect twilight coming through, and she had the light on her room, and thankfully none of the other lights were on in the house. And it was, you know, sometimes as a photographer, you're like thanking the photo gods, you know. This was the stage at the Princess of Wales Theatre, and I've done lots of stuff with Mirvish Productions in the past. Like, you know, we do stuff with their shows leading up to their shows. Like for this pro show, I had done them like setting up the stage, because they brought in trees to put on the stage and all this. And this was for Come From Away. And when the pandemic hit, I knew that Mirvish stage had they were like one of the few theaters that have what they call the ghost light. And it's a light that they put in the middle of the stage when the show is not running. And, you know, there's different, they call it the ghost light because, like, the joke is it gives the ghosts from past productions a light to perform by. But really, it's there just to make sure that if someone's walking around on the stage, they don't fall into the orchestra. So I got in there and shot the ghost light. Painter. This was actually, this slipped in here, but this is a painter who does a lot of mindfulness and what do you call it? It's grief counseling through art. And she started it because her brother had been shot. And so she like started this grief counseling through art classes. So we were doing a feature on her. And then we got to, like, you know, the stage of the pandemic where, like, this is the first shipment of vaccines into Toronto Airport. Came by FedEx, overnight delivery from I don't know where. It's like, these is a special container. It's at like minus 18. It's at like, I think this was at like 6 a.m. on the tarmac at Pearson. Then we were like into like the whole first vaccination thing. These are people loading vaccines at a vaccine clinic that was held at Toronto City Hall. So it was fun because they like, this is usually where the city, it's one of the committee rooms. So it's where usually they have their initial budget meetings and things like that. So all of a sudden this room is like, you know, row after row of people just loading vaccines, because I think they vaccinated like 10,000 people that day. And then, like, you're always looking for like funny stuff, right? This was a vaccine clinic at the Toronto Metro Convention Center, and it was the first vaccine clinic open to children. So they had children's. I don't know if you guys get TV Ontario there or Polka Dot Door, but the character on the left is Pokeroo, and the character on the right is the mayor. So. And in Toronto, just like any other city, you have lots of vulnerable population. So like one of the hospitals, Humber River, was making a very big push to vaccinate people in their apartments. So we spent a couple days with Humber River, going from Toronto community housing places to like where they would basically show up and knock on doors saying, if you want to get vaccinated, please sit out in the hallway. We'll be by. And they were going floor to floor vaccinating people. This was a gentleman. He was kind of like the first big Delta outbreak we had was in Barrie, Ontario, which is a city that's about an hour north of Toronto. And it was at a long-term care facility. And it decimated that long-term care facility. They had like, I think it was like 50 deaths, and like half the whole staff caught it. And this is one of the personal care workers there, one of the PSWs from there, who ended up getting COVID and, went into the hospital and ended up having to get a double lung transplant. And he was on ECMO. He was like, kind of like a miracle. And he's, like 45. So it was kind of like that thing that drove it home for everybody that like this is just not old people that suffer from it. And it doesn't mean you're going to die, but like double lung, like, holy man. And to be that young and have a double lung transplant, and you can see like underneath his you can see the scar that runs underneath his chest, and then you can see those like dots. Those were where the ECMO came in. And I don't know if anybody here knows what ECMO is, but it's basically a machine that breathes for you and pumps your blood for you. And then business was coming back. So one of the stories we did is just north of Toronto, there's a nudist resort. And it's a campground. It's called Bear Oaks. And they have a restaurant. So we went up there for like, how is business doing up here? Let's see. So like they let me come into the kitchen with them.
I saw that photo on one of your sites earlier, and it really sort of cracked me up, right? And then looking at your photos tonight, what you showed us already, like the seriousness of the pandemic. I mean, the previous photo of this is like, I think that's a really, inspiring story, but it's very touching. It actually brings up, there's a couple questions here. Brett says, how much of your work is assigned versus walking around, and do a lot of your walking around photos end up at the Star? And then also, Lezek, who is from Scotland, who's up at 2 a.m. right now, how do you get access to all these sites, and is there a special way to introduce yourself?
So I'll answer the first question first. This is like a great story this is a great picture for the look behind the scenes, right? But I'll put up one of my vacation photos here. This is because, like a lot of the stuff I shoot. So how much is assigned? I get between 2 to 4 or 5 assignments a day. It depends on what's going on. Sometimes like I might come in and I'll have 1 assignment. Sometimes I'll have 6, but the average is 3 to 4 a day. So within that framework, there's stuff that I might find too that I might self-assign. So like if I see something in the paper, or if I see something as I'm driving around, sometimes it's just me seeing something like nice light and I take the picture. I count that as an assignment. And sometimes I might get a tip from somebody. Like somebody might reach out to me in my DMs on Instagram or on Twitter and go like, hey, Steve, like we're having this event and this is what happens. It should make great pictures. So, I'll research it a little bit, and I might tell my desk, I'm like, hey, there's this going on. Should we go? Like, I'm going to go. Do we have room for it? So I'd say 75% of the stuff I do is assigned, and 25% is kind of like self-found.
Oh, fair enough.
A lot of the stuff to get access to it, it depends on what you're doing. Like a lot of the stuff we've seen here is kind of like, like out in the street is like street photography. Like obviously to go into City Hall, you need like, I'm credentialed up to the hilt here. Like, like I've got my City Hall pass, I've got my Queen's Park pass, which is our provincial legislature. I've got like a press pass. I got my Leafs pass, my Raptors pass, my Jays pass.
Do you have a multi
So
pass?
I wish they had something like that. But for the most part, a lot of the stuff you can get in if you approach them, and if you're professional. This is why I want to go. This is like right now, today, like for instance, one of my assignments was we were in Sick Kids Hospital because of the how the kids ICUs are being slammed with this kind of like triple pandemic of the respiratory virus, the flu, and COVID. And so for that, we contact Sick Kids and we're like, we'd like to get in and understand what's going on. And here's our angle. This is what we'd like to do. Like we're talking, like, we went to see this, we went to see the ACT team, which is acute care transport team. So they transport children that are very sick between hospitals and move them around. So right now, like some hospitals are super full and they don't have any ICU beds. So what this team does is they move them to other places that might have capacity, or they bring them to sick kids where they have like, lots of doctors and, it's the cutting edge of like childcare. So for that, we present like what our idea is and why we want to tell it. And then we work that out with their PR people and they go like, yeah, okay, we think that's a good story idea.
Well, that's very cool.
And then they'll let us in.
That's good. All right.
Sorry, this picture of the whale here. This is in Tadoussac, Quebec, and it's a place where my family and I go for vacation. So it's like, I shot this from shore, but you can go out in kayaks and, be as close as that guy is to them. This is a humpback whale.
That's impressive.
Toronto, there's lots of protests and demonstrations, and this was one for Palestine. And so this is these are the arches that go over the reflecting pool in front of City Hall. You can see City Hall off to the right-hand side of the frame. You're not supposed to climb on there, but every so often people climb. So it's, like I'm basically just trying to tell the story. There's protesters, it's Palestine, it's at City Hall. I'm trying to make the picture have as much impact as possible, like, trying to like tell a story and make it so that people, when they read the paper, they stop on a page. In Toronto, I don't know how it is in Calgary, we've had a lot of homeless encampments, and the police are fairly heavy-handed when they clear them out. So, this was them clearing out one of the encampments by a place called Lamport Stadium in the west end of Toronto. And there was an encampment there that was for the whole summer, and they decided they wanted to clear it out. So, you're just kind of following the police through as they clear it. This is from same thing. Police are clearing out an encampment, and some of the people are just vulnerable, and you're just trying to illustrate that, and you're trying to also give them dignity. Like, usually when it comes to homeless people, I try not to identify them in photos unless I have like permission from them, but when like these kinds of things, there's lots of activists there too. So, I kind of like, I'll shoot activists a lot more than I will the residents or people that are, trying to help. So like if I'm shooting a resident, I'll try to keep it so that like, they're fairly non-identifiable. Like, if someone knew this person and they knew about the tattoos, then they might know something, they might know who it is, but it's not something that someone sees this picture in the paper and then they walk down the street and they'll be able to identify that person right away. So there's another picture of Nicholas from the series. Sorry, I got something out of order here. This was these were the First Nations protests for the residential schools. This was at Ryerson, and that podium that this woman's standing on was the podium that had Ryerson statue on it. And Ryerson was one of the architects of residential school systems. So, and since these protests, like since his statue came down, there it is. Ryerson's changed its name now. It's now Toronto Metropolitan University. So this is the thing too, is like when I'm photographing something too, like I'll file both a tight shot, I'll file a loose shot. I file like a lot of different pictures because before I would, before and back in the film days, 25 years ago when I started, we didn't file too many. We'd file like from any assignment, we might file between 1 and 6 pictures kind of thing. And now, just because of like the speed at which we can shoot and the speed at which we can edit and we can send back, like I'll file 20, 30, sometimes 100 pictures from an event, like if I think it's important enough, because we have so much stuff going on now. Like, like 1 or 2 of the pictures might end up in the paper. We have social media teams that do stuff with pictures now too. So the more fresh stuff you give them, the more they refresh it. Same with online, like the web galleries, just the web stories, they update them all the time. So they always want fresh stuff. So it's funny because you go from like one deadline that we had, 1 or 2 deadlines that we had back in the day when I started, to now, like I'm always on deadline. Right. So that's what I really like. Like recently, I just got the new Canon R3s, and that's what I really like about it, because it's really easy for me to send a picture from that camera to my phone and just send it to the paper. Like I can take a picture now and have it to the paper in like 15 seconds, which is insane. Like thinking about like back in the day where, sometimes we would drop film off in a cab to get it to the paper as quickly as possible. The irony though is like some of the guys that when I started at the paper, we had guys like at the paper like Boris Primo, Jeff Good, Frank Lennon, and Frank Lennon's famous because he shot that famous picture of Paul Henderson's goal. We had all these guys, and they said when they started at the paper, there was 20 editions of the Toronto Star per day. So there was like a morning edition, there was a mid-morning, there was an afternoon, there was a noontime, there was a mid-noon, there was a drive home, there was like the doorstep, like, like the supper time, the late evening, and then like it started again, like, first thing, like, you wake up and it's on your doorstep. You go to the subway station and there might be like another edition of the paper with some updates. You got downtown, there might be another edition of the paper for sale that had like a couple more updates mid-afternoon and what's happening in the financial world. So it kind of mimics what we have now with all those constant deadlines. 40 years ago, they had these constant deadlines because they would always want a fresh picture for each edition, so that it looked like different from the edition that someone might have got at their doorstep at home. And now we're kind of mimicking it just online. It's funny how you get that cycle where it all comes back together. These are some more of the encampment clearing outs. And this was a Black Lives Matter protest where they brought the horses. This was the teacher recently in Toronto. We had, like in Ontario, we had the one of the teachers, the school support workers were about to go on strike. So they're having a rally outside Queen's Park. You always have to be ready for everything that happens in the job. So that's why I I'll carry 2 cameras all the time. And one usually has a 16 to 35 on it. Although with the R series we get the 15 to 35, and like I really love that 15 instead of 16. Like it's amazing what a difference it makes. And I usually carry another camera with a 70 to 200 on it, and that's so that I'm ready for anything that like will happen. So like if something happens close to me, I can use the widey. If something's happening a little bit further away, I can use the little telephoto.
So
And then sometimes
that's a great 1-2 punch there, Steve. Like I like that combination as well. It's like a journalist's dream for that. The 1535 gets you in really close, and you're shooting some, potentially sort of violent protests, right? Or the tension is there. How do you care about your own safety, and what steps do you kind of take? Do you introduce yourself to the police, before?
well, I try to be like fly on the wall, right? And that's the other thing now about because I've switched to mirrorless just like 2 months ago, but I've had access to I've had like my own R6 for like 9 months, and it's super super quiet. And when I had my 1DXs, like these are loud, right?
Yeah.
And so I find now with the mirrorless, it's so much easier to be like the fly on the wall. Like, you fire that off and people like the 1DX, and people are turning around to look at you and go like, like you become a little bit more of a target. And, you're usually what I do is I go in and get out, go in, get out, go in, get out, like go in, go out, assess what's happening and see where I need to go, and then go back in. Okay, there's something happening over there. I'm going to go try to weasel my way in there. And now with the quieter cameras, it's a little bit easier to stay in, because like I can put on silent mode on the R3 and people don't know I'm there. And right now I'm like shooting a photo essay with a couple where they're in their late 80s, and the husband is fine, but his wife has got severe dementia, but they're trying to live at home as long as they can. And so I'm just kind of like fly on the wall with them, right? And it's just so nice to have that super silent shutter that if they're doing something like very intimate between them, I don't have that loud shutter just blasting away in the background where they're like, it becomes a distraction.
Yeah, that's
So
a feature. That's a feature of mirrorless cameras that people underestimate a lot, and they think maybe if you're shooting in a church or in a library or something like that. But just in real world, that loud shutter sound certainly draws attention.
well, even if you're at like a concert and then someone's playing an acoustic set and it's like, oh my God, it's like so loud. Like you can put these things on silent mode, like on like the old 1DXs, but it's still a loud camera. And you got people shushing you, and like it's just so nice to have. So this is from the same this is from the same thing. There were people, this was during the campaign, and there was before the provincial leaders were going to debate. So there was like some workers that were protesting, and they were getting shoved around. This is I went to Ottawa for the trucker, the convoy protests. So this was like the perfect time, like where we're talking about durability as far as like being a person covering it, because you're in the cold all day. Like you're just walking around Ottawa all day looking for pictures, looking for things that are going on. You're trying to keep you're trying to listen to what people are talking about to see if there's anything going to happen here or there. And we had the gamut of weather. We had like super sunny and cold. We had like snow and warm, and then we had like freezing rain. So like those are like the kind of events that punish you, because not only are you getting soaked, but your gear is soaked at the end of the day. So you're trying to like do every trick in the book to keep your gear dry. Like I have like all this kind of stuff, like I have like those plastic little $10 sleeves that you can buy at a camera store. You guys probably sell them, that just fit over the camera. I don't have one here right now, but
yeah, we've got an assortment of rain covers.
yeah, and like I always have like a bunch of like Ziploc bags with me. And then even like you go stay at a hotel, and I always steal the shower caps because they fit really nicely over a camera.
That's not a bad idea.
So like, and they're like, the other thing too is they don't take up much room in a camera bag, right? Like, so you can carry them around. And then like, the other things like this is like, like not only are your hot packs in your shoes and in your gloves, you also have them in your pockets. You have them in your camera bag where you keep your batteries, just so you can keep everything warm.
Yeah, I mean, I put a lot of faith in the Canon engineers, and I think they have, especially their higher end bodies are incredibly rugged and robust. But I don't like testing it all the time.
Well, and then that's like the first thing like I do is like it gets tested, right? Like we just got these cameras today, and like one of our group chat that we have with all the photographers at the Star was like two guys going like, because it was rainy, it was freezing rain today in Toronto, and so like like I was getting reports like, oh, the R3 passed the rain test today, so. This is more from the convoy, and we're working all hours. So like, like I'm shooting, I'm shooting at ISO 100 to ISO 6400. And one of the first things I do when I get a new camera is I'm like testing how far I can push that ISO. Like, like for me, like I love cameras when they can almost see in the dark, because it gives me more opportunities to get pictures. It gives me more options when I'm trying to get those pictures. Like if I could squeeze out a little bit more ISO and have a little bit quicker of a shutter speed to freeze action in certain situations, that's great for me. So I'm always testing like the camera when I first get it in different kinds of lights, and then like, gently pushing the limits on it and I shoot mostly JPEG. I hardly ever shoot RAWs, because of my workflow. Like, like I'm looking at, like if I go cover a hockey game, I'm shooting like, 6,000 frames, maybe, like in an exciting game. So I want to work through that quickly. And I just don't like that interface with Photoshop where you can do the RAW with the RAW plugin. Oops. This is my favorite picture from the convoy when the police were clearing them out. So a lot of times too is you're there. I was there for 4 days. So like, when I was there like when they clear them out, this is the kind of picture I want. So you're always kind of planning it, right? You're like, okay, I'm going to fight the urge to go into the middle of the melee and go to the side where I can try to get the two sides clashing. But in this side, like the police fired, it wasn't tear gas, it was just smoke bombs. Thank God, because I didn't feel like crying that day. And, they're moving through, and there was like, we have the Terry Fox statue that they put all the like paraphernalia on earlier on, and you got the Peace Tower, but then you have like the RCMP. Yeah, these are RCMP on this part moving through and clearing out Wellington Street. And when you cover protests, you're always looking like, no matter what it is, you're trying to tell both sides of the story. And then sometimes you try to bring it together, right? So, this was, I was at a Black Lives Matter protest. And when the protest was over, people were like, like police were going back to wherever beat they were on. And protesters were like, just kind of like going around the city. And, you see the two sides come together, and it's kind of like, oh, the dog is like the conduit to bring the two sides together. So like you're trying to tell little stories with the pictures too. Toronto, we have like a lot of steam vents. So sometimes like, like if the weather's right, you get like lots of steam, and people like to go in them and dance and stuff like that. Like this is kind of like, just walking around the city. If I have like a break in my day where I don't have any assignments, I'll just go walking around and looking for pictures, like just exploring the city, trying to find things that might make a story, or trying to find things that just make a nice picture that day. Like we're always looking for like weather pictures or stand-up pictures. So like, like sometimes there's a hole in the paper and they go, oh, we need like something to fill this spot. And we're like, oh, we've got a great picture of like a slice of life of Toronto. same thing, like, just night shift wandering around and just trying to look for a nice little picture, nice little slice of Toronto life. And nothing's more Toronto than street meat. So police funeral, just trying to shoot it a little bit differently. It was raining. And that's the other thing about the gear. Like, like I'm in all kinds of weather. So like, like today I was saying in Toronto is rain and sleet. So we're expected to be out in that. So like, like we really truly punish our gear. Like if you're to look at my cameras, like I have like a couple of my 1DXs.
Yeah, I was going to have you show that. You showed it me earlier, and it's, we have a local legend around here, Mike Drew, and I think, your cameras are actually even worse shaped than his.
Yeah, because they float around like they're like, I have some friends that shoot, they shoot exclusively sports, and they show up at the arena and they have the nice Nanook boxes with the dividers, and like it looks like like a surgical, like somebody's laying out stuff for a surgery, like when they take their stuff out. Meanwhile, I'm walking in with cameras bouncing off each other because, like, like I was just out at a street protest, or I was just shooting somebody before the game and I had to come in. And I drive around the city a lot with the cameras on the seat beside me or one in my lap. So, I can't tell you how many times I've hit the brakes and the cameras have gone flying across. So, I'm looking for sturdiness. And if you look at my cameras, they're beat up to like.
Well, that brings up a point. Do you put protective filters on your lenses?
Oh yeah. Sometimes I can't get them off too, because like lenses are so beat up. Like you can get them on, but you can't get them off. And like my 3 workhorse cameras before I got the R3s, like I have 2 1DXs, and they have 1.1, 1.2 million frames on them, and I have a 1DX Mark II that I loved when I got it, and it became my like primary camera, and I got 1.7 million frames on that, and they all have the original shutter.
You've never had the original shutter replaced at all?
No, never.
That's impressive.
I've had other things go wrong. Like one of them, the microphone on one of them doesn't work. So if I'm shooting video, I have to use a boom mic or whatever they call it, like the on camera, like.
Right.
We call it dog dick, a shotgun mic. Yeah. So I have to put that on it. But as far as like, that's the only thing that's kind of wrong, right?
Well, that's good.
And we do like lots of slices of life. So like if it's a hot day, we will go down and like, shoot stuff by the lake, or like just people enjoying the city, right? We have a food section, so we're always shooting like food stuff. So, like you get to be a little bit creative. This is a bar with the owners and the chef, and we're like, instead of doing kind of like a regular portrait of somebody, I wanted to show that they're like in a vibrant area of town. So I did like I did a little bit of what I call it shutter speedery. Some people call it pop and drag, like, so it's a little bit of a pop of a flash on the 3 guys at the table to freeze them, and I give the camera a little bit of emotion so that it, gives you the illusion of it being like in a vibrant part of town.
Well, I've heard like, second curtain sync. I've never heard of shuttery, did you call it?
Shutter speedery, I call it. Actually, we had when I started at the Star, we had one of the chief photographers, a guy named Mike Slaughter, who's British, and he would always say like, "Oh, you young guys in your shutter speedery." So kind of adopted it. And it's fun, like, because you get to shoot like things that give you the pulse. This is one of the theaters where the Harry Potter show is, and so what they did is they did a $5 million renovation of the space for the Harry Potter stage production. So they took everything out. Here's more shutter speedery, and it's like a lot of times I go in and I'm like just learning about what the story's about, like as soon as my phone dings, right? So this was the publisher of what's the magazine called? I can't remember. She does she's a publisher of like kind of like a horror mystic kind of magazine. And I was shooting her at a place called Stone Crow Manor, which is kind of like very like, it's got like a room that's kind of like looks like a set of like Alien. There's another room that's got, like looks like the Jedi bar. Another one that looks like everything that kind of looks like out of a horror movie. But I just wanted to show something like, like it was coming up to Halloween. So I just wanted to show something spooky with her. So like I did like, like a 5/4 second exposure where I just kind of held on to her like and did the pop of the flash. So that's how I kind of made her look like a ghost. Like I wanted her going from ghost to human.
That's a very cool technique, and actually, I encourage people always to practice, practice, practice. Right? You can, especially digital nowadays, doesn't cost you anything to experiment. So get used to your gear, see what kind of effects you can get, and take something that might have been not necessarily as exciting of a shot. Now it's got a whole new character to it.
Yeah, and then when I when I was in photo school, like when I was in photojournalism school in Belleville at Loyalist College, they had, I spent $5,000 a year on film and paper. And now it's like, it's great. You're not limited by 36 exposures. You can really experiment with it. You can have that instant feedback. You can nail the safe shot, and then you can kind of like, let's play a little bit. Let's try something different. Like, like, oh, I saw someone was doing something with like, panning and popping a flash. Let me try some of that, see how it works. And then like we do traditional stuff too. This is Hillary McMillan. She's a fashion designer. This is just in her studio. So this is like very simple setup again too. Like one light on her, letting the background blow away so that the trees don't become distraction behind her, and using like a table to reflect things. This was an Indigenous fashion show. And sometimes like look for moments, shoot in moments that you think like, like I always see people go like I've shot diving so many times, and I see people that shoot diving sometimes just shoot the dive, and they're not shooting the lead up. They're not shooting the person getting out of the water. Like look for those moments before or after what you think is the actual moment. Because you'll find things in there. Like this was like, she does this dramatic unveil of this dress. And, the dress is fantastic, but I just found this like moment just so much more powerful, like leading into it, because it leaves you guessing. Like if someone were to see this in the paper, they're going to wonder what's going on, and they'll read about it and they'll go like, oh, that fashion show is going to happen tomorrow night. I'm going to go see it. I'm going to see what this dress looks like. I always like taking the camera at different places. Like, so this is, I've got like this kind of like housing. It's like a soft housing for my camera, so I can take it into the water. So this is like a split screen. Half the third of the frame is underwater, and the other third is above, just trying to like show the person fishing and give you like, put you in the water with them, like on the water, in the water. And playing too. Like this is my daughter. This is like, we went camping and I shot this, right? Like just her jumping off a rock into the water. But there's things that I like, I learned from this that I can take now, and it's always experimentation, right? Like if I do this for a living, but I also do this for fun, and a lot of the stuff I learned doing it for fun, I bring over into work. And looking for unusual moments all the time, right? This was we had a provincial election, and this is a candidate who's out canvassing, and knocks on a door. Guy comes out in his pajamas, like the guy works shift work. He was sleeping. He comes out and sits on the porch with no shirt on, just pajama pants. just like a little slice of life, right? Just this Niagara Falls. A lot of times, like, it's fun just to try out different things. And when I got the R6, I was like looking online to see what kind of lenses. Like, I don't have too many RF lenses. I've just got the 15 to 35 and the 70 to 200. But I was like flipping through the thing, and as a Canon ambassador, they give me stuff to try out. So I noticed they had like a 600 f11, and it's f11 all the way through, right? Like you can't. It's just like a dedicated f11. So I was going out to Quebec for that family holiday, and I was there like, oh, I'll take the 600 f11 with me if they have one that I can borrow. So they lent me one, and it's just fun to play with that and like learn how to use a new lens. It's funny because you always think about like, oh, you can be a professional, but you're still always learning, and new lenses, sometimes it's nice to have constraints on it. Like, at a f11, like you're not worried about depth of field anymore because you're like, okay, it's f11. I get what I get now. Like, I got to play with it to learn different techniques with it. How am I going to manipulate the ISO and the shutter speed to get something interesting?
Yeah, dude, that 600 f11 and the 800 f11 are, surprisingly inexpensive lenses that give people that crazy reach, and the image quality is very good out of them. But it really gives people a first chance to really explore like really hardcore compression.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. Like,
And they don't weigh anything.
well, then that's the thing too. Yeah, I'd love to try the 800 f11. Like, next time I go on vacation, I'm going to borrow one of those. We didn't have this snow today, but I always like the slice of life stuff. Like, like we have, like you're always looking for like these little moments. And this was somebody waiting for the next bus because the bus she was on got stuck in the snow in Toronto. We didn't call the army this time, so don't worry, we were safe. This was last year. But I thought it was funny because, she's got her dart going while she's waiting for the bus. Like, it's just a fun little moment. And this is another one, like, on my walks at night, And like some of this stuff that someone asked before, like, how much is it like assigned and self-assigned? Like, we're always looking for weather pictures. So whenever I bring one in, they're always happy. This was a event at one of the historic homes in Toronto. It's a place called Spadina Museum. My wife actually works there, and they had an event called Dismantle. And so Spadina Museum is like a mansion that's right beside Casa Loma. More people might be familiar with Casa Loma. But Spadina Museum was a mansion that was owned by the people that started the CIBC, the family that started CIBC, and they also owned Enbridge Gas. It was called, I forget what, it had a different name at that time, but it ended up being, the follow through of the company is Enbridge Gas here in Ontario. So what they did is like they reimagined the home as the home of a woman who was at the they reimagined the home as one of the women who worked in the laundry at the house, who was an escaped slave from the U.S. So this woman's portraying her. So it was quite an interesting exhibit because, like, they hired a local artist to curate everything, and so like they changed all the art in there from like like white people with the big pork chop sideburns to all of a sudden like it's like like prominent Toronto African American business people and athletes and people from that community. We shoot lots of politics. This was Andrea Horvath, who is the leader of the NDP, going into the election. and she was on a campaign stop in Sudbury, which is a town 4 hours north of here. And I was shooting something else up in Sudbury for an assignment. And I heard she was in town. And then I'm from Sudbury originally, so I'm very familiar with the area. And I heard she was doing a press conference outside this miners memorial. And I was there like, oh my God, if she loses the election, this is the picture to get. Because it's got all these miners with like hammers and picks and chisels. And I'm there like, it just looks like her party's like attacking her behind her. This is another kind of like self-generated thing. I was up in Sudbury for something else, and they have there's the opioid epidemic has hit Sudbury hard. They have over hundreds of young people dying, and I was going by this memorial to them where this one family had lost Miles Keeney's family had lost Miles Keeney had died of an opioid overdose, and his mom goes there and put up this cross there. And so all of a sudden now there's 200 crosses. And so his family will put up a cross for anybody that wants one. And so now it's like gone from his cross to over 200. So this is like one of the things where, and this is like a gentleman who was just there, and his girlfriend had died of an opioid overdose, and there's a cross dedicated to her. So he's just going over there to spend a little bit of time with her cross, kind of thing, because it's like right in the middle of Sudbury, and there's like 250 of these crosses now, and this is just over a year. So like it tells you like all about the opioid pandemic. So these are things that I find that I kind of like, it generates stories. We have a food section, and so we have like 2 food writers at the Star still, so we shoot a lot of food, so which is a lot of fun too, because like I always find the new places to eat and great places. Like, this is the Momo house. I went shot them, and now like Momo's in my takeout rotation. We get Momo's every like month. And we're always looking for the unusual. So this is a woman, her name's Tanya Grassi, and she owns a place that she calls Darling Mansion, and it's just basically a detached home in Toronto. But she's had like all these artists in residence some of them are quite established graffiti artists, and they work in the house for a while, and then they paint a room. And then her house has been used in all kinds of movies and music videos. Like I think The Weeknd filmed a music video there. So like it's just a great place to shoot because all the rooms are just so striking and just so iconic. Like even this is the kitchen. Like just so much fun to shoot.
It looks like an amazing place.
Yeah. This is another restaurant picture. They have a dish where they pour hot oil on it, so they kind of cook it right at your table. So I wanted to show that, like, in the stuff that they cook is like almost frozen. So like they pour the hot oil and you get like an instant reaction. And if you walk around Toronto, like you might not be plugged into what's going on, but you'll find stuff that's going on. So like I was out one day and I totally forgot it was the World Naked Bike Ride.
There's a few jokes I can make, but I'll just sort of leave it at there.
We did a lot of stuff with the zoo during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, because the zoo was closed, we ended up doing like lots of live streams. So we would like kind of like pick an animal and live stream it for like a month. This is Yo-Yo Ma at the playing with the orchestra for their like anniversary. Pride. I love it when people protest at Pride, because then like, it just encourages like, like these great pictures of like contrasts. I found this while I was camping. It was an aerial artist who brought her silks with her camping. This is a memorial to the Iranian plane that was shot down just outside Tehran. Lots of Canadians on it. Music. This is kind of like in the theme of reopening Massey Hall, reopening, people showing up to the first night of Massey Hall. It underwent like a $50 million renovation. It was mostly they built a big tower, like a big condo tower next to it too. So this is Junior Caravana or Junior Caribbean Carnival. Again, lots of food. So we're always shooting like, food stuff all around the city. We're always like trying to localize, international news. So like when California was having those big giant California and Washington State were having those wildfires, you started getting that like crazy sunrises and sunsets. So I went down to the beach when like, in the morning when people were playing, and this is shot with the Canon 2-400 with the built-in 1.4 converter. So I'm shooting this at like a, 560 millimeters from like, pretty far away to sandwich the things together. This is Sandbanks Beach at sunset, probably the nicest sunsets in Ontario. This is Northern Lights over Georgian Bay. We were doing a story about hockey rinks back, like the city allowed a lot of people to make these hockey rinks, but none of them were lit, and nobody was, like in the wintertime, the days are so short. So I had to light it myself. So I put up 2 lights, like just 2 Canon strobes on sticks, and, just shot while people played, just balancing the light with the twilight. I call this one Backyard Bobby Orr because he looks like he's mimicking that famous Bobby Orr. And like, it's the return of sports too. So we had like lots of like, like empty stadiums and games, and we had like, funny moments on the bench, with guys wearing masks. We're lucky in Toronto because we have lots of professional sports. So like, you get to shoot a lot of it. So, there's Guerrero getting hit by a pitch. The ball actually bounced off his hand and like picked up his hair. You got the Leafs, got the Raptors.
So you got a couple successful teams in Toronto. Do you find that the like the new wave of cameras, the mirrorless cameras, have really sort of changed how you shoot sports, going from 10 frames a second up to now with the R6 Mark II, you can go up to 40 frames per second. Has that changed how you shoot sports?
It's changed, but not so much in the frame rate. What it's changed for me is that the autofocus is so good on it, like especially the face. So before on like my old 1DXs, I would like this is Jurassic Park in the rain. The Raptors were playing on the road in the playoffs. But what I would do before is like I put the focus button on one of the back buttons on the camera. And so like the front's the trigger. So that way, if someone's going through my frame, I can take the thumb off and the camera doesn't jump focus. It stays on the player, like it. So I'm always feathering that back button. But with the new cameras, the eye focus and the actual focus, like the regular focus, I have them set for 2 different buttons. I have one set for eye focus and one set for kind of like a regular focus. But I find that the focus is so good on it, like I have to learn to stop feathering it, because like if it grabs onto a face, that person can go, like someone can cut through my frame and it'll still stay on that person's face when they come out the other side. But what it also does, it also allows me to frame a picture rather than like, like almost center framing all the time for sports. Now I have a little bit more leeway where I can kind of like, okay, there's my player. I got the eye focus on him, and I can frame the picture so that, that person can be there, and I have like way more control over composition.
Cool.
This is Chris Boucher during intros. Again, like you're always ready for news to happen, right? Like, so this was at a Raptors game, and one of the speakers up in the rafters caught fire. Had to evacuate the stadium, and they ended up finishing playing the game in an empty stadium. But the speaker was on fire, so they had to lower firefighters from the catwalk close to where we keep our remotes, actually, like where we put remotes up over the thing, and like they had to rappel down to put out the fire. Here's one of my favorites. It's from but you know, like that whole Raptor championship run and the bus rides were super fun to cover. I was on one of the buses, and Kyle was on the bus behind me.
Oh, that would be an amazing time there.
Yeah, look how deep the people are. It's nuts.
That's crazy. All right, Stephen, we're starting to wrap up a little bit here and get to some question and answers here. I'll give you 3 of your favorite photos here. Last 3 you can pull up here.
It's hard, like it's hard to say what my favorites are, right? Like, you know, I love the little moments, right? Like this is Canada, USA, and Hamilton when Canada kind of like, you know, beat the US, so they like became like this. It kind of solidified their trip to the World Cup. It's hard to pick because like you're so emotionally attached to so many of the moments, and you know you're thinking about what you did to get the picture and how you worked. This was all these kinds of little moments around the city, walking around, Remembrance Day. Like this was Grey Cup. This is from Grey Cup too. Like I was doing a thing about all these hair flying. And like, you know, finally the Argos won the Grey Cup, so it was a lot of fun. I'm always looking for emotion, so like the job is so fun. Like when you get to be in these places where, you know, like you see on TV, like to be in a dressing room after a team wins, everybody's so happy, you know. This is where the gear gets punished too, because like, you know, you're covered in champagne and it's all sticky, and you know.
I was going to ask, do you have a way of cleaning your cameras after champagne or anything like that?
Well, same thing. I try to cover the camera as best I could. So usually what we do is like at a Grey Cup, because it's cold outside, we'll bring an extra camera and wrap it in plastic. And it doesn't go out into the field. It just stays inside in a warm area. Because when you go if you're bringing the cold camera inside, it's going to like just, you know, fog up and you won't get anything. The one thing I like too is I like doing multiple exposures sometimes, and sometimes it helps you like figure out what a player does, and sometimes it's just fun to like, you know, like. If we're doing a feature on Glouceman here, we have, you know, something different. And whenever I'm at baseball, I love shooting fans. I was so sad when they put in the fan netting. It probably saved a couple fans from like bad bruises and all that. But I just love when the ball goes into the crowd because you get all these like fan faces. These are like this is kind of like the thing with the camera that's so good. Like, you know, like Guerrero comes in, and in this series I have him sliding, and he slides from where we're shooting. He's sliding like the catcher's in front of us and the umpire's in front of us, and he pops up the other side, and the camera never lost that focus. Like on the old cameras, you know, you're feathering because you don't want the focus to jump onto the umpire and to the catcher. And so when he comes out, you're just praying that you're going to have him in focus. But with the R3s and the way it focuses, it's so intuitive, like where he's going to be. So you can get these like little moments. This is the play that ended the Jays season when Bichette and Springer collided in the outfield. This is off a remote. So I currently have 6 cameras. So I have 2 1DXs. I have a 1DX Mark II. I have the R6, and I have 2 R3s. So I'll shoot predominantly with the R3s. The R6 and the 1DX now are kind of like my remote cameras, but sometimes like some events I might set up a couple extra remotes. And depending on the weather too, like I'll put one of the beat up cameras out in the weather because like you can just trust it a little bit more, like that you're not going to wreck it, like especially
Oh, yeah.
for remotes. It's so low percentage, right? And like this is all shot with the 2:4 at like, you know, 1 point with the 1.4 converter activated. So, you know, this is shot. You know, I'm over 100 meters away from this.
Yeah, no, it's impressive like what the technology is capable of doing today. So
I'll just blow through. I got some like hockey here. This is the Leafs when they got eliminated from the playoffs in the first round again last year. It was fun during the season because like you know they started off last season like with empty stands, but the mascot was still there, so it was funny just to see him interacting with people.
yeah, I know some, you know, in a big city like that with multiple professional sports teams, right? There's plenty of opportunity to shoot a whole variety of sports.
Yeah, I mean, like even we have like an event called the Royal Winter Fair, so we have like 1 day of rodeo in Toronto. So
Wow, we have about 300 in Calgary.
I know, I know. I was there like I was asking my wife, should I put in a rodeo picture because they are in Calgary, right? And she said, "Oh, put it in. People can heckle you." This is a fun picture because it's Maggie McNeil, Kylie Mass, and what's her name? Ingrid. But in this race, it was a World Cup event, and they finished 1, 2, 3. So I have them starting 1, 2, 3.
Oh, nice.
I think that's it.
Perfect,
Oh,
Steve.
I finish it off. I finish it off with the tennis tournament we had here because it was, you know, it was kind of like the return of Bianca Andreescu from injury, and she won her first match, so she was really happy. And then you had Serena had announced her retirement from tennis, that she was going to retire after the U.S. Open in Toronto. So, like, you know, like have her walking off the court crying was kind of like, you know, a moment for that
Wow.
tournament.
Amazing.
There we go.
Geez, we made it through. I wasn't sure we were going to make it through all like 450 photos I think you had there, something like that. I think
No,
that's a
it was
record for a live
140.
stream.
It was 140, I think. 150, it says.
It's great. One thing I noticed is because you're photographing so many different diverse things, from really emotional rallies to politically charged rallies to all kinds of stuff. Do you find that you get emotionally involved, or have you learned to kind of separate and just sort of step back and shoot?
Well, sometimes the camera is like a buffer for me, right? So like I'm holding the camera and like, you know, like I'm just reacting to what I'm seeing through it. It's like something that stops it. But one of the other things is I have like a lot of anxiety. So like for a while I was getting like really sick and, you know, really anxious all the time. And it was funny because in my downtime, I would be anxious, but when I was working, I wouldn't. And, you know, like even when I picked up the camera when I was at home, like, you know, like doing stuff at home, I wouldn't feel as anxious when I had the camera. And, you know, like talking with my therapist about it, she's there like, because when you got the camera in your hand and you're like shooting something, you're in that moment. Because like being a photographer, I'm also a pessimist. So like I'm worried about like you know like I worry about like you know when I go to an assignment, I have the dream of what the perfect assignment was going to be and how the perfect pictures are going to end up and what's going to be super awesome. But then I'm also planning, okay, I need a plan B just in case that doesn't work. I need a plan C. I need, like, what happens if this happened? Like, and we're like, if I show up at somewhere and there's a couple other photographers and we're at a news event, we're always going, okay, what happens there? What happens there? Okay, if that doesn't happen, where do we go? So I'm kind of like a worst case scenario kind of guy, as much as I don't want to be, but it's part of the planning for work, right? Like,
so with that being said, you've been doing this for so long, and you've shot like the same wharf or the same street or the same thing years after year, and the Maple Leafs exiting first round year after year. Do you get tired? What inspires you to shoot sort of the same city over and over again at certain spots, and what drives you?
Well, for me, it's like it's a different story every day. Like even if like even if you like this past week I shot the Leafs 3 times, right? So there's all these ongoing storylines each time. Like, each game might have a new hero. Each game might have a new villain. Each game might, like there's the ongoing storyline where Mitch Marner's got like a point scoring streak going on. Like, it's 23 games now. Like, and no one's out of like active players. It's like the 3rd longest out of all the active players that are playing still now. Right. Like, so there's all these stories that kind of keep going. And even when you go to Queen, to cover politics, like boring stuff sometimes, you can ask and find things out. And walking the city, like when I drive somewhere, I try not to drive the same way every day. Or I'll try to I'll make it an effort to go for, that's why I walk around the city a lot too, is because, like I'm never really walking around the city at the same time or the same place. Like,
There's
like if I have
a different appreciation of a city when you slow down and you walk a city rather than drive a city. I mean, how often times you've driven by a restaurant a million times but never actually stopped in to see or try. Yeah, and it's great to be able to do that. So.
And it's also hard too, because sometimes you might see something and you're like you'll be driving by in the car and like you're like, oh my God, there's a picture. And like you're trying to pull over somewhere, find a place to park. You finally do. You run to that spot and it's gone, and you're like, oh man, like.
No, I was actually surprised to hear that you didn't switch over to full mirrorless till quite relatively recently.
Well, part of the thing is like we've got 4 or 5 other photographers, so like the expense of switching over is a lot. But then again, like they haven't really invested in the cameras for 10 years, like. It's one of those things where you work at a big thing and like, the news industry is shrinking. So there are like financial pressures on it. Right. And like the other thing is like these old cameras were so good that you could kind of get away with like, not going from the 1DX to the 1DX Mark II. Yeah. Or like, they kind of got me one, and then we like, okay, you got one of them. So you're using 2 different cameras, but they're like the same setup and all that. So it wasn't until like this recent thing to the R3 and the 1DX Mark III, where like all of a sudden you saw that jump in quality. And the other thing is how easy it is to move a picture from like, the R3 to a phone to file. Like those are things that sell them on it. And, the video files are way better because like I do shoot some video too. So
that's right.
The tool just got to the point where these cameras, like, a million frames, there's dead pixels. They're starting to, like a million frames. You've exposed that sensor to light a million times. And that's not even counting how many hours of video I've shot on them, right? Like, so like that sensor is starting to like look rough.
All right, and then the sort of last question I'm gonna throw at you tonight is as you've been doing this for a long time, what is the most challenging aspect of a journalism lifestyle? I mean, you've got a family, of course, and you're away working all different kinds of hours. What to you has been sort of the most challenging thing over the years?
The challenge is like the news industry's contracted so much that you want to stay positive. So, like like I said, like I'm like a pessimist. So like you're always worried about your industry, but I'm also like, I love my job and I love what I do. So it's easy for me to motivate myself. Like, and for me, I'm always looking for new experiences and new things to cover, right? Because those are new challenges. Like if I were to go out and shoot the same thing every day, like, like, uh, if I was a studio photographer, I would be seeking that outlet outside of work all the time. Meanwhile, I have like in the job that I do, I'm just so happy with like, the variety that I get. Like, like I shot 3 hockey games last week. I'm shooting a story on a couple dealing with dementia. I've it's just so many different things, right? Like it's like I was in a hospital today covering like, like stories, I get a dose of like stories that matter, stories that don't matter. I get to explore the city in a different way. I get to sometimes have access to places that, people never see. Like I get to be the eyes for the city. And like, I try to keep that light on it. Like sometimes like I might see something that's just fun, and it might be something that somebody walks by on their way to work, every day for 10 years. And if I see something, I might be able to photograph it in such a way that they look at that picture on the paper or online on my Instagram or something like that, where they go, man, I walk by that every day and I've never seen it like that. And it helps open up their eyes to seeing the city in a different way, right?
Fair enough. Fair enough. We're going to wrap it up a little bit here. You said earlier on, which was a great quote, was you're like the eyes of the city. It's kind of how you look at yourself, and through your eyes, you've shared some amazing photos and really make people experience the events and the times that we've gone through, from whether it be the pandemic or any kind of protest or what have you there. So I want to thank you for tonight. This has been a fantastic presentation, and the photos. It's so nice to sort of see some amazing stuff through the eyes of somebody else who's very familiar with their city and has a great eye, and is also very technically proficient and able to capture some very unique sort of things. So I appreciate you coming out tonight and staying up extra late. And I also want to thank Canon for sponsoring tonight's event. And if you haven't registered for this event, simply send Evelyn an email and she will send you the promotion we are running with this, and you'll get that in your email. And thanks everybody for sticking around and watching this presentation. And Steve, thanks so much, and we'll catch you again soon. We'll have you back on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and like, yeah, have me back. I'd love to talk again and share some more pictures, and we could do something, more sporty. Like,
if you ever get to Calgary, or if I ever get to Toronto, let's go for a coffee and we'll walk some streets.
Yeah. And that's the fun thing too about exploring the city, like a city with a camera, is like, I see people that come to the city all the time, like a couple of the people I follow on Instagram when they come up for like playoffs or whatever, like, like big story. There are people that are kind of like me. They love the craft. They love, they have their toy cameras, like, they have their little Leicas. They have like different, like there's a guy I follow out of San Francisco, Scott Strazzani, like, he shoots, his street photography is insane. And I look at his stuff and I'm like, man, like, and he came to Toronto during basketball playoffs when we were playing Golden State, and he like shot around Toronto, and I was there like I said, like, these are the streets I drive every day. And it's what I try to like bring our readers. And he brought it to me. He came to the city and he shot it in a way that like, like I walk around the city now and I see a little bit of the way he saw it.
That's
and
amazing.
It's just fun to like see like your city in a different light and a different through a different lens, really.
Well, I always tell people, I said, never stop looking, always keep looking. So I really enjoyed your presentation tonight. I really enjoyed the photos tonight, and I look forward to our next time together. So thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and we will catch everybody on our next live stream.